Alright, what's up everyone? This is Ryan here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the design process, and we'll also sort of get into that in the next video as well. This is sort of the first half of it. Now, before we get into this, I wanted to take a moment to just talk about a couple things. For starters, with these two videos, this one and the following video, what I wanted to cover is not just the sort of the fine details of how to create layouts, like what the particular attributes do in a linear layout or a relative layout and things of that nature, but rather I wanted to cover the design process that I use as a whole in a scenario where I don't know ahead of time what my user interface is going to look like. Now, one of the reasons why I chose the calculator application is because all you need to do to get an idea of what the calculator needs to look like is to pull up pretty much any calculator application or just grab the nearest calculator, which I think 99% of people watching these videos probably own one, and just see, okay, well, obviously I need a number pad, an equal sign. Depending on what kind of operations you want to cover, I just chose to cover multiply, divide, subtract, and add. And that's basically all you need. Obviously, you need a display and you need some kind of a delete button. So that's basically the reason why I wanted to mention that is those are details which you do need to figure out ahead of time. And I'll actually be doing a video in the next section, section 2, where I cover how to figure out those finer details. Those details kind of being related to what's called the problem domain. Anyways, we're not going to go into that, but I just wanted to mention that I will revisit that step. We're not just going to skip over it and then not cover it at all. I will cover that, but it's kind of a software engineering principle more than like a design principle in my opinion, and that's why I chose to kind of keep it separate here. Anyways, moving on, let's talk about the sketch. So as you can see, we've got a sketch on the right side of the screen, and it's pretty damn ugly. Now, I used to get very, very detailed with these sketches, including things like the name of each widget, probably some of even the layout attributes in the sketch and stuff like that, and just spend like a half hour on the sketch. Now, the thing about that is that it's actually kind of a waste of time. At this point in my sort of career, if you will, I only use the sketches, they're only as detailed as they need to be, I'll put it that way. So for example, I needed to figure out how many buttons can and these needed to be large buttons, that was important to me. How many sort of large, clear, difficult to press two at a time buttons can I include in sort of a typical screen size, which is what we have here. That screen size is actually based on my Nexus 5S here, or 5X, I can't remember. But how many buttons can I include in the layout, a single layout? And also, obviously, we need to include like the display. And it turned out that after I did the sketch, I realized that the delete button was going to need to be included in the display fragment, and that actually helped us out, helped me out later on in sort of the back end stuff to keep those things separate, and we'll see why later on. But anyways, the point I'm trying to get at is that these sketches only need to be as detailed as they need to be. You don't need to go overboard with them, but I do strongly suggest you write down some sketches before you get into the layout, before you get into the XML and the design previews. And the simple reason for that is that when you're building user interfaces, unless you're an absolute wizard and you can do it really, really quickly in XML, you want to get something visual on paper so that you can see, okay, well, this is going to need to change, or this looks nice, or this looks terrible. Get whatever that picture you have in your head onto some kind of visual medium, and then that's when you can kind of critique it. Anyways, that's basically my spiel on doing sketches. So you can also do this kind of stuff in Photoshop and programs like that, and use wireframes and more advanced things. Because I'm kind of a ghetto-ass programmer, and also because I just quite frankly don't have the time, and I'm not fast enough where doing sort of Photoshop stuff would be really useful to me, I don't bother doing that. I just do sketches, and then I do the layouts, and then in the next video, we'll actually see how using the design preview and alongside styles and themes, will allow us to preview what our app will look like, and we can kind of tweak it on the fly. So anyways, what we'll do is we'll just hop over to Fragment Input, and we'll finish up the layouts for that. Alright, so I've opened up Fragment Input, and what we're going to do is just figure out the layout stuff for it. So there's kind of a rule of thumb that we're going to be following for this project, and basically what that is we want to kind of do something similar to sort of the division between HTML and CSS for web development as one sort of parallel to that. So basically what I mean by that is that as a general rule of thumb, any attribute which starts with layout and also any ID or text attribute, and there are a couple others, but I'm just not going to make a comprehensive list. We'll figure it out as we go. Any of those things are going to be included in a layout XML file, and then just about anything to do with styling, so we're talking about background colors, font sizes, font family, things of that nature, sort of those visual elements, padding, margin, things like that. There is, well, basically there's no point in including that stuff in a large series of views which look the same. You are wasting space and writing extra code if you do that. So what I'll do is in the next video we'll cover how to do the styling. For this video we'll kind of cover the layout and the general structure of the XML file, and then in the following video, as I say, we'll cover the style stuff. So without further ado, go ahead and open up input.fragment.xml, and we'll just get started here. So the first thing we'll do is we could just get rid of this text view that was automatically generated. That's totally useless. And we're going to be changing this from a frame layout to a linear layout. Now, I'm assuming you know a little bit about linear layouts. They're basically good if you want to sort of align things along a vertical stack or a horizontal sort of columns or things like that. We'll kind of just see it as we go along because I don't think my explanation really helped there. But yeah, we'll just see as we go. Now, one thing that's important is when you're creating linear layout, you want to specify an orientation. Now, that's another thing that you can include in the the layout XML instead of the styles file, the styles XML file. So for this one, we're just going to say Android orientation, and we're going to say vertical. Now, what does that do? Basically, that means that any of the child elements within this view group are going to be stacked vertically on top of each other. So that's pretty much all we're saying there. And then we're also going to just throw something in here just for a little aesthetic concern. Now, I know I just said that we don't really need to be including stuff like this in, we don't really want to be including this in layout XML, something like elevation. But the fact is, I'm only going to be including that in this one element here. So there's no, in my opinion, there's no reason to make an extra entry in the styles XML file for one single thing. So like I know that's a little bit contradictory, but use your discretion. Like whatever allows you to get the thing done the fastest and write the least amount of lines is generally going to be your best bet. So what we'll do is let's create another linear layout. And for the width, that's going to be match parent. The height is going to be set to 0 dp, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Yes, thank you for the autocomplete there, Android Studio. And the next thing we'll do, we want to specify its orientation again. And so that's going to be horizontal. Horizon. Why is that not auto-completing? That's bothering me. Oh, because I'm typing horizontal, not orientation. That would be why. Yeah, so horizontal for that. And the last thing we'll do here is we're going to specify a layout weight. And we're going to set that to 1. So what is layout weight? I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time explaining it, but basically what we'll have is a situation where we have 4 linear layouts that are more or less the same. Don't actually do what I'm doing here. We're going to copy and paste the whole thing so we're not retyping a bunch of shit, but I just want to use this as a tool to explain it. So what that's going to do is, since all of these layouts have a height of 0 dip, which you want to set, if you're setting a layout weight for a, let's see here, if you're setting a layout weight for vertically aligned elements, which these are, then you're going to want to set the height to 0 dip, and then the weight to whatever you want the weight to be. So what is weight? Basically, by setting all of these to 1, this means that each of these view groups, each of these linear layouts, is going to take up a 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 ratio of the screen. So in other words, they're going to take up 1/4 of the screen. So it basically turns into a sort of like a fraction. So hopefully the design will, yeah, the design is working for us. So by specifying that layout weight, we've set it up so that each of these linear layouts are going to be evenly distributed across the screen, and that's what we want to do. So I'm not going to go into too much more explanation about it, but just as a quick preview, that's what we're going to do. If you did type that, go ahead and delete it. We'll copy and paste more stuff later, just to speed things up. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is add our buttons. So we're just going to use regular buttons for this. No need to use image buttons or anything like that. In fact, that would be sort of counterintuitive. So the first things first, layout width. For these buttons, we're going to say 0 dip for the width now, since this is a horizontally oriented linear layout. And then for the height, we're going to do match parent again. You should probably know what match parent is, but it just basically fills the available space of the parent, or basically conforms to the size of the parent, I should say. And what we'll do is, again, we'll add a layout weight. And again, we want that to be evenly distributed just across the screen so that all our buttons are the same size, so we can just go ahead and do that. There's a couple things we'll need to add. So for starters, I'm going to add let's add an ID at the top. And we're going to call this button. So this is the naming convention that I generally like to use for views. You don't necessarily have to do it my way, but I do suggest that you figure out a way to do this and have it consistent across the apps you build. Because when other people read it, it's going to be easier to understand what's going on and things of that nature. So the way that I like to name views is I start with like a 3-letter sort of condensation of what the view is. So for example, for buttons, I use BTN. The next thing I'll do is sort of the next 2 words are going to be either the, if I'm working with like a large number of activities and fragments and stuff, I'll include the name of the fragment or the activity as like the next thing. In this case, I'm just going to say BTN number 7. And I know that this is going to be button number 7 because of the sketch. So just if you're wondering how I'm just pulling that out of my ass, that's where it's coming from. And yeah, so we're going to call that BTN number 7. And then the last thing we're going to say is we'll just say Android text equals 7. Now, it's probably going to complain that we shouldn't be using hard-coded strings. In this case, it's a number. I'm not really interested in supporting devices and users which don't use the base 10 number system. So that's one case where you don't, in my opinion, you don't really need to make the extra string resource, but that's why it's saying that. We'll get into that kind of stuff in another tutorial. I won't digress into that. So yeah, that's basically all we need to do. Now we're going to add one more element to these buttons here, which is called style, but I'm not actually going to do that yet. We'll do that in the next tutorial, but for now, we'll just go ahead and do some copy and paste. And each row is going to have 4 buttons. So we'll just do that. And so the next one is going to be button number 8. And the next one is going to be button number 9. And make sure you're changing the text as well so that it reflects that. And then the last one is actually going to be it's not going to be button number. We're going to call that BTN operator divide. And instead of doing a number there, we're going to just do a slash. And so here's the thing, like when I started coding this, writing this application, originally I was going to do image buttons for multiply, divide, add, and subtract. But what ended up working out really well was to actually have the the characters themselves that are used in calculations by the computer. So, for example, slash, or maybe that's backslash, I forget. Asterisk for multiply, and then of course we've got plus and minus for the other stuff. And it actually works well to not use image buttons. If you're trying to release the most pretty app possible, you probably would want to use image buttons instead, but I'm kind of cutting a corner there on purpose. So anyways, in a real, not a real life, but in an actual scenario, you might do something like that as like an alpha release, but then later on come back and add some more attractive graphic assets, because it doesn't look the best. It could look better. Anyways, what we're going to do is let's just copy that whole thing, and we're going to make 4 of those. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. And all we're going to do is just go through all of them and fix them. So this thing's going to light up like a Christmas tree because we've got a whole bunch of repeated IDs, so we'll just go ahead and fix that. So let me just find my place here. So that's going to be button number 4, button number 5, button number 6, and I believe that's multiply. Yeah, that's button operator multiply. And we'll go back and fix the text. So that's going to be 4. Going to be 5, 6, and we're going to type in an asterisk or a star, whatever you want to call it. We'll head down to this one again. That's going to be 1, 2. I could probably skip ahead with this stuff, but I just didn't want to do that too much for this tutorial since I kind of promised that I would walk everyone through everything. So if you're kind of bored at this point, I do apologize. We'll get to some more interesting stuff. But unfortunately, not every part of programming is that interesting. Sometimes you just have to type this kind of shit out. So let's see here. So that's going to be subtract. And that is, of course, going to be a dash. And then we've got our bottom row here. And so the first button is going to be 0. 0. The next one's going to be a decimal. So we're actually just going to say btn decimal. No need, decimal, yeah, that's correct. No need to be more descriptive than that, to be honest. This one's going to be btn evaluate, and that's going to be the equal sign. And then the last one is going to be subtract, no, add. I have like the worst memory ever. So I feel like I missed the add button, did I? I did subtract twice, that's what the problem is. Yeah, so that one's going to be add, and that one's subtract. Perfect. Alright, so a little screw up there, but we got that figured out. So let's just jump into the preview and make sure this is looking okay. So, yeah, it looks ugly as sin, but this is the layout that I wanted to set up, and that looks sort of, what I'll do is I'll throw up an image of the sketch again. That looks like the sketch that I wanted to make. Of course, we haven't done the fragment display yet, and we'll do that next. But yeah, we have our basic layout structure set up. So this is sort of step 2. We've gone from the sketch, and we've created the sort of the structure. We've created the layout XML file that we wanted. And so that's sort of like the HTML part. And then the next step is going to be the CSS type part, which we'll do in styles.xml. Now, before we get to that, the last thing we'll do is we'll hop over and code fragment display. So we'll do that right now. All right, so I've opened up fragment display. Now, I'm going to kind of cheat again, and, you know, that's just life. So, and we'll see what I mean by that in a minute. Let's just switch this to a relative layout. Obviously, you want to be using the layout that is best for the job at hand. Now, the way that I'm going to cheat is I just finished telling you that you don't want to be including certain stuff like this in the XML files, but rather you want to be including it in a styles.xml. So I include something like background or elevation, which we'll set to 4. Oops, just 4. 4 dp. There we are. and Android padding bottom, which is going to be 24 dip, and Android padding top, which is also going to be 24 dip. And I'm going to explain why I'm doing this again. In a scenario where you have multiple activities and multiple fragments, that's where you absolutely should be including something like this in a styles.xml file. It's a single screen application, and I want to save your time. I'm not really by going on this tangent, but hopefully you know what I mean. So this is okay in the context of this single application where we don't have any more than one activity. But yeah. So basically, the elevation, we're setting that to 4, so that's going to give our display sort of like almost a toolbar appearance on phones with API 21 or greater, so that's kind of nice. And also the padding bottom and the padding top are going to sort of center our views in the middle of that display, which looks a little nicer. So that's really all that's going on there, and that's all we need to do with that layout there. I've deleted the text view, of course. We're going to add an image button, which is going to be the X button, which we use to delete things. And the layout width is going to be 72 dip by 72 dip. And let's see here. And that is going to include some padding, so if that seems like it's probably quite large, we are going to kind of fix that up a little bit. We're going to give it an ID, of course. For image buttons, I like to use IMB. For image views, I like to use IMB. And we're just going to say IMB delete. Again, like I would, if I was working on an app with multiple screens or fragments or things like that, I would include like IMB display delete, but since we're single screen, then we're just going to do IMB delete. Now this next thing, oh sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit here. We're also going to specify a source for that, and I can't actually remember if I downloaded the icon for this. I don't think I did, so what we'll do is we're actually just going to leave source blank, and that's kind of a blunder on my part, but we'll sort that out later. I'll show you where to download buttons, where to download high-res icons from the Android website, and we'll do that at the end of this video, but for now we're just going to leave that as source. And what we'll do is horizontal scroll view. What the hell is that? So basically, I did some research into this, and this was really pissing me off. I found multiple sources that said that text views naturally are scrollable once they reach a certain size, but I could not get that to work for the life of me, and I don't know whether it was because they were in a fragment or what the issue was. But basically, the purpose of this horizontal scroll view is there will be a certain point when there are too many characters on the screen for our for our text view display to show to the user. So I want the user to be able to scroll the text view so that they can see the entire result of the equation. So that's why I'm going to include this. It's going to have a bunch of funky styling, which we'll include in styles.xml, but for now let's just say layout width is going to be match parent. Layout height is going to be 72 dp. I don't want it larger than that. And, excuse me. Yeah, and then we'll deal with all the padding and other stuff later. What I will do is we're going to see why the relative layout is super useful now. So what we'll say is layout to end of, and then we'll supply our image button, IMB delete. And then we're also going to copy that. Oops. Let's go ahead and copy that and include that there. And that's going to be to right of. So what does that do? What is Aleppo? Sorry, mocking Gary Johnson, their presidential candidate. Anyways, what does the horizontal scroll view do? So, what does this layout to end of and layout to right of do? Basically what this is telling the this parent relative layout is this view is saying, hey, I want to be put on the right side of this image button. So do not overlay me. So that we'll see the sort of visual preview of that in a moment. Well, we can see it right now actually. So by including that layout to left of, or sorry, layout to right of and layout to end of, this is the effect that we've achieved. We've got our button over here, and then we've got our scroll view to the right of that. So what's this layout to end of? That is for these things called right to left layouts, and to be honest, they've kind of been pissing me off, but because Android Studio incessantly nags you about them. Basically, some devices or some countries or things like that use right to left layouts on their devices, uh, or other way around. I can't remember, and I don't really care. Basically, what this does is if you've got someone who's using like a different layout, then if you do to end of instead of to right of, then it'll handle both situations. Now the problem is, let's see what happens if we remove this. It might actually, I can't remember, I'll just kind of just cut that out. Yeah, so when we remove that, it says to support older versions than API 17, you should also add layout to right of. Now, if I were to remove this part, it's not an error as far as I recall, but it'll still nag at you. Oh, it's not really complaining right now. But so yeah, that's just a pro tip. Generally speaking, you're going to want to include both of those unless you're being particularly lazy, which I wouldn't really blame you for. So yeah, that's all we need to do. Oh, we need to give it an ID, of course. So we'll say ID equals @+ID, and that's going to be SCV. I use SCV for my StarCraft days. SCV display, and yeah, that's all we need to do there. And within this text view, we're going to place within this scroll view, we're going to place a text view, which will of course be our display for equations and where people can enter digits into and things like that. So this is going to be for layout width. That's going to be wrap content, and that's of course it's going to wrap to the size of how many characters are in the text view, and then if that gets to too many, it'll be scrollable. So that's what we're doing there. The height is of course again going to be 72 dip. That's basically the size that I want everything in the display other than the sort of root layout itself. That's good there. Let's type in an ID, that ID. So this is something where I'm kind of an idiot, but and I can't even really remember where I adopted this convention, but I don't do TXT. A lot of people do like TXT or TV for the abbreviation. I type LBL, so I apologize if that confuses you, but I do what I want. So LBL display, that's what we're going to call that. And then there's a couple other things we need to add here. So let's see. So we'll specify a layout gravity. And let's see here. We're going to say layout gravity end. So what that should do is that's going to place the text view on the far right side of the scroll view, which it sits inside, and that's because we want the text to be right justified and then sort of grow outwards as you add numbers to it. So that's all that's kind of doing there. I could probably also specify end and left. That would probably be a good thing to do. It's not complaining about that, which confuses me a little bit. And that shouldn't be left, that should be right. My mistake. Okay, well, I'll take your word for it, Android Studio. Apparently end is fine for down to older APIs, so we'll just assume that that's correct, and if not, then I'm going to phone Google and be like, what the fuck, guys? Anyways, I wouldn't actually do that, they're cool. So, the last thing we'll do is give us a little visual preview, and to do that, we are going to use the tools namespace. So, if you've kind of been wondering what this XML namespace tools that Android Studio keeps adding into all of your shit is. Tools is basically a namespace that has some design time kind of developer tools which you can use for various things. We'll see another example of that in a moment, but for now, we'll just type tools, text, and then let's type, for example, 985 plus 600. And this is a design time attribute which will get ignored when the project actually gets compiled. Now, what does it do? It allows us to see, oh, we can preview some text in this text view. So that's just kind of a little useful tip. And yeah, so I think the last thing we'll do is I'll show you where to download those icons from, and we'll add those in. And then we'll just see if our activity calculator is sort of working as a preview. And yeah, so we'll hop over and do that. Okay, so naturally I went to the website to download the icon, and I'm getting a 404 error, and I have to be at work in like an hour. So we're going to do that in the next episode, or the next lesson, because I want to get this video out. But the last thing I thought I would do for this lesson is just give you a quick preview of the design preview of Activity Calculator. So let's just look at the text really quick here. So what we've done is we filled out this tool's layout attribute here. And what that's allowed us to do is it's telling the design preview that we want to include these particular layouts in this activity, and we want to preview that. So this is a newer feature as far as I'm aware, being able to do this kind of thing, but we'll actually see how this can really help us when we get into styling. At the moment, obviously, it looks ugly as sin, and we will be fixing that. But I just wanted to show you this is kind of a neat thing we can do, sort of almost in place of doing like a Photoshop sort of wireframe or something of that nature. Not to say that that isn't a really good way of doing it. That's just not the way I do it. So yeah, anyways, this has gone on, I guess, long enough. So what we'll do is we will see you in the next lesson, where we'll cover sort of styles and making things look pretty, basically. So we'll see you later.